I want to take the next couple of slides and talk through THN's monitoring strategies that we will be implementing in 2023 and beyond. We have recently updated and revamped our approach to ensure that we're aligning with the priorities that and direction that our HUD reps give us. So we'll be taking a much more intentional approach to monitoring folks this year and moving forward. We plan to use several methods to monitor both performance and compliance of COC recipients, which include reviewing annual performance reports in SAGE as they're submitted. This is something that we already do pretty routinely. THN is not the approving body for your APR. That authority lies with HUD. But if we identify any concerns or red flags related to performance or compliance within the APR submission, we will definitely follow up with you and just likely ask some questions to better understand the report that was submitted. Additionally, we will monitor folks through quality review plans. So the folks who are subject to conditional inclusion in a given year will work with THN to develop a quality review plan to improve performance. Conditional inclusion essentially means that we recommended your project for funding to HUD through the annual COC competition with the condition that you'll receive specialized technical assistance from THN staff for a minimum of 12 months for the purpose of performance improvement. All the folks who were conditionally included in FY22 or the most recent competition have already been notified. So if you have not been alerted to a quality review plan or conditional inclusion process, is not something you need to worry about this year, though is a real possibility for future years. Additionally, we plan to monitor folks through a renewed focus on the quarterly performance scorecards, which we'll be talking about later, as well as on-site and desk reviews, which we'll be talking about over the next couple of slides.
Hey, real quick, I know that we're talking about reviews. I just wanted to, I feel like I needed to say something about match. If you already have an approved match, like if you already have a match source and that's what you've told HUD, you have to do that. You cannot change your matching source without communication with your field office. So I just wanted to, I feel like I may have given folks the idea that like, oh, anything is eligible for match, and while things may be eligible to be used as match, the specific match source that you use must be communicated to your field office in advance of making changes to that match source, if that makes sense. So like every year you have to submit your match documentation to your field office if they request it. Some field offices do, some field offices may not, depending on the project. But if the, you'll submit something on agency letterhead or an MOU with a partner, if things change from that, that is okay, but you have to communicate that on the front end to your field office. And now I'll stop talking about that, but I feel like it was really important to say before folks got too far down the road with that. Yeah,
definitely important. Thanks for that note, Jim. So taking a closer look at on-site and remote desk reviews. So these are both strategies that we plan to implement in 2023. We anticipate that on-site reviews will be very similar to a HUD monitoring, and we plan on utilizing the same HUD monitoring exhibits to assess compliance that your HUD rep would use. So this would include a program file review, a financial review, as well as a review of documentation related to general administration and management. That being said, we as THN cannot issue a finding or corrective action plan in the same way that HUD would following monitoring, though if we have concerns as a result of a monitoring, we may request and strongly encourage you to participate in technical assistance with THN to ensure that compliance issues are resolved. I also want to note that selection for monitoring by THN does not exempt you from being selected for monitoring by HUD. and vice versa. So it's possible that it could be monitored by both in a given year. Desk reviews will be completed remotely as needed, using a complaint-driven process, meaning if a current or former participant submits a complaint to THN or the Balance of State COC about their participation in the COC program, that project will be subject to a remote desk review, which will be very similar to the on-site review, and will utilize the same HUD monitoring exhibits, though it will be less formal and will not include a financial review. The scope of that review will vary based on the nature of the complaint, but at minimum, you can expect that we'll review the client's file that submitted the complaint and any policies and procedures that were in place at the time the client received services. And those will be reviewed against the monitoring exhibits relevant to your project type. I see a question in the chat. Can we formally request from THN these on-site and remote desk reviews? That's a good question, and one that I don't think we've talked about internally. Jim, I don't know if you have any insight or thoughts.
Yeah, I will say that, you know, we're very similar to everywhere else where capacity is a real issue. We, like Hope said, we have not discussed requested monitoring. So thanks for sticking yourself out there like that, John. But short answer is I don't have an answer. But right now we were not planning to honor requests for on-site reviews. I can tell you that for sure. We just simply don't have it in the budget to be able to go everywhere in a given year. So yeah, let me think about that one a little bit. We'll need to get back with you on that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that, John. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Axton to talk about some internal monitoring strategies for participants.
All right, so as we mentioned earlier when we were discussing the COC project applicant expectation form, projects must have an internal monitoring strategy. So an important part of any internal monitoring strategy is going to be participant file reviews. So recipient agencies are encouraged to identify an internal review schedule with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. So that means identifying who's responsible for completing the file review, who's responsible for ensuring that the review is completed, the schedule that those are going to be completed on. These are preferably all things that would be laid out in policy documents and not just done kind of haphazard, because it to be effective, these have to be done on a regular basis. So what exactly does a participant file review look like? So it's basically a thorough analysis of all the files associated with a participant. We recommend that these are done quarterly, but should be done annually at a minimum. So, I mean, as Jim just mentioned, as we mentioned elsewhere, we know everyone has some capacity issues, so potentially reviewing all participant files every quarter is not feasible, but you should at least try to get them reviewed at least annually for PSH projects. And then we also recommend that participant files are reviewed within 2 weeks of a participant being enrolled and within 2 weeks of a participant exiting from the project. The requirements for rapid rehousing and joint transitional rapid rehousing projects, those are going to look pretty similar. Again, it entails a thorough analysis of all project files annually at a minimum. And then we also suggest reviewing about a quarter of your participant files on a quarterly basis, just to stay on top of that. And with potentially giving priority to older files. The longer a client has been in your system and been working with you, the more kind of records they're going to have associated with that. So there's more room for items to be missing or errors to be made. So again, we recommend prioritizing those older files. And then again, similar to the PSH, we recommend reviewing participant files within 2 weeks of enrollment and within 2 weeks of exit. The internal monitoring strategies for SSO projects will look a little bit different. Those projects should feel free to reference the HUD CPD monitoring exhibits that we referenced earlier, or also you're always free to reach out to us if you have questions about what kind of guidance you should be adhering to. Okay, so more detail on what participant file reviews look like. So the participant file review should focus on 6 main categories, and we'll just kind of go through them one by one. So you need to be checking for participant eligibility. So this could include documentation of homelessness is correct, potentially documentation of a disability. That's probably going to apply more to PSH projects. Similar, if the documentation of chronic homelessness status is required, making sure that is done correctly and present in the file. Moving on, enrollment documentation. So you should be checking for that the enrollment paperwork has, for example, like the correct dates on it and the correct, all the signatures are signed. Making sure that a release has been signed for the client or participant to allow you to enter their information into HMIS or a comparable database if you use that. Moving on, also looking at rental assistance and leasing documentation. So that could include things like housing quality standard inspections, making sure those are completed on time and documented. That means completed before the client has moved in and before payments have been made. Making sure there's a copy of the lease in the client file. And again, kind of making sure those dates align. You don't want to have a lease that starts on one date in a housing quality inspection that shows like a week later, because that needs to be done prior to. So just making sure all those dates are correct, kind of dotting your I's, crossing your T's on those. Also need to be checking for service delivery documentation. So this would likely include like the initial needs assessment when a client is enrolled in a project. And it would also include any kind of annual assessments. Again, annual assessments could be needs assessments or financial assessments, and those generally need to be completed either 30 days prior to or within 30 days after the 1-year mark of the client's enrollment. So they are annual assessments, but we technically have a 60-day window to get those completed. Service delivery documentation could also include just like case notes and other documentations of the services rendered to the participant. You also need to be checking items related to just the HMIS database. So again, this would be making sure things like dates for like move-in or enrollments, making sure those dates entered in HMIS match any physical documentation. Again, HUD would not like to see an intake paperwork with one date completed and then enrollment in HMIS with like another date several weeks down the road. Dates need to be matched up when possible. Includes income and HMIS matches the income verification documents. So again, when you complete annual assessments or enrollment assessments and you're documenting income, making sure that your physical documentation verifying that income, making sure that matches with the information actually going into HMIS. And then finally, also looking at exit documentation. So this could include a copy of a participant's termination letter. If there is like an involuntary termination, we'd also want to see documentation that kind of all the appropriate steps were taken before that termination. So that means like multiple contacts attempts, making sure the client knows they have like a right to appeal that decision, and items like that. I think there are definitely more things that need to be checked for when doing a participant file review. These are just a few examples. And the THN, we have some internal monitoring guidance that I've just dropped into the chat that goes into a bit more detail of what those participant file reviews should look like.
Great, thanks, Axton. Before we move on, I just want to say if this is not something not a practice that you are currently doing at your agency or within your program, I feel like the idea of starting it can be really overwhelming. So I feel like, if this is not something you're doing currently, a great next step would be, getting with your teammates and just finding some time on your calendar, blocking off a few hours to do a file review as a team. Go ahead and set up a recurring calendar invite for, every quarter or every month. So you have that time already blocked off, however frequently you decide to do it. Because it can be really it can be really hard to find time if you're also trying to operate a program and case manage folks. So go ahead and schedule that time in advance, and make it a fun team building activity. Again, we encourage all of this quarterly at minimum, but can be more frequent depending on the complexity of your project. So moving on, I want to talk through the process that you would use if through a file review, you identify a deficiency within a participant file. So this guidance comes straight from our internal monitoring guidance, which Axton just dropped in our chat, which states that when you identify a deficiency in a file, project staff should develop a memo to the file, which I believe we have a template memo if that's something you need. If that's the case, please reach out to us and we will share that with you. But the memo to the file should contain a clear plan that documents the steps you'll take to resolve the deficiency and when. And if after following those planned steps within that specified time frame, you're not able to resolve the deficiency, you should notify your HUD rep for further guidance. You are welcome and encouraged to reach out to us first so that we can help prepare you for that communication if that's something that you're interested in or something that you would benefit from. This, as I mentioned earlier, I see a couple folks asking for the template. Yeah, that's something that we can send out after this presentation, or if Axton or Jim have access to that and can share it quickly in the chat.
Yeah, I should be able to dig that up. It might take me a minute or two.
Great, thanks, Jim. So be on the lookout for that in the chat and you can download it. So this form is not intended to resolve serious deficiencies like potentially serving ineligible clients or using funds incorrectly. Again, back to my earlier point, it is always better to ask for forgiveness than try to hide an issue or a deficiency. And if you identify a serious deficiency that cannot be resolved and you don't alert your HUD rep and that deficiency is later identified in a HUD monitoring, you could potentially have to repay all of the funds spent on that participant. That's not meant to scare you, meant to prepare you. However, if you alert your HUD rep as soon as an issue or a deficiency is identified, there's a strong chance that they're going to be more, willing to be more flexible, and are likely going to be able to give you some direction on how to move forward and correct that issue. I see, a couple of folks asking for the PowerPoint. Yeah, we will share that after today's session to all the folks who attended, and that will link all of the resources that we've been talking about today, and we can include that memo to the file template as well. So folks will have all of the information that we covered today.
So whenever we're talking about this memo to the file, I know you've already said it, but I just want to reiterate, right? It's not intended it does not resolve an issue like where you've enrolled someone and they don't have sufficient support documentation for homelessness. But if, for example, a housing quality standards inspection was conducted outside the, outside the window, or the annual assessment was conducted on day 61 rather than day 59, right? That would be an appropriate place for a memo to the file. Or if, a service plan was conducted late. Again, it really, y'all, it's not intended to resolve more serious monitoring or internal monitoring issues of compliance. Again, we are available to support y'all through that. If, for example, I hope nobody finds himself in the situation, but if you discover through your internal process that, oh my gosh, we've been doing client eligibility wrong for the last 3 years, like that's what Hope and Axton live for at THN. Like we want to have that conversation with you because chances are it's probably not as bad as you're thinking. Or if it is as bad as you're thinking, we can tell you up front before you go to your field office that, hey, like this is what could happen, da, 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 da. Again, none of that is intended to scare anybody. Just, you know, I've seen it over and over again where, you know, forgiveness, asking for forgiveness is indeed the best approach to this thing. It looks like Axton dropped a memo to the file template in the chat. So if you have questions about how to use that form or when it's appropriate, or you're going to use it for something and you're not sure it's appropriate, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And to reiterate that, we want to help, but we can't help if we don't know what's going on. So please reach out to us if you have a concern about your documentation, whether it's a participant file or, you know, some administrative documentation. You know, we can only help if we know what's going on. And we definitely don't want to find out at the same time as HUD. We want to prepare you as best as we can for that communication to HUD. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. That is what we are here to do. So moving on to, we've talked about, you know, program file reviews and client file reviews. Moving on to some more like financial and administrative items for review. This is not, let me go back. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but you know, definitely a great starting point. So looking at these components, there are a number of areas where recipients can focus their attention when it comes to completing an internal review of these areas. And you know, each of these items has a recommended you know, time period by which you review those that you can note here, but these are recommended time frames, but I would encourage you to do what best, you know, what's best for your unique project and your agency. So match documentation, we recommend reviewing this quarterly at minimum. Though depending on the type of match, it may be in your best interest to review this more frequently, you know, as frequently as monthly. You know, as Jim mentioned earlier, some folks, depending on your field office, are required to submit proof of match annually to your HUD rep at the time of your contract renewal or execution. This is also something that we collect annually through the COC program competition, but we don't look at like the actual, you know, source documentation that you maintain throughout the year, just those, you know, commitments that occur annually. So if you use Cash Match, you should be maintaining documentation of expenditures paid for with Cash Match and any source documentation for those expenditures to ensure cost eligibility. If you use in-kind services for match, you need to not only maintain a clearly defined MOU or memorandum of understanding between your agency and the agencies providing services, but you also need to track and document the in-kind services provided to your participants within the given the grant year or operating year. I think Axton linked the match virtual binder earlier in this presentation. That's also linked later in the agenda. If you again, match documentation is the most common monitoring finding, so I would recommend spending some time with those virtual binders to make sure that you understand the documentation requirements of your match source. If you have questions about your documentation, you can send those to myself and Axton. And we were happy to provide guidance on your specific match source. Expenditures and cost allowability. We recommend reviewing this monthly, even if you only submit your draws quarterly, which quarterly is the minimum. This review should focus on ensuring cost allowability of expenditures before you draw those funds for reimbursement from LOCs, and also ensuring that your expenditures are accurate and complete and have source documentation where needed. Timesheets and activity tracking. If you are charging your staff time to multiple budget line items, which we expect that you would be, we would also expect that you have some method in place to track the activities of your COC funded staff. The easiest way to do this that I've seen is incorporating that into your timesheet, so that your timesheets paint a really clear picture of exactly how your staff are spending their time to ensure that funds are being drawn correctly for reimbursement. For example, if you're charging a case manager's time to both the supportive services line and the rental assistance or leasing line, we would expect to see those time allocations on their timesheets. Single financial audit requirements. This doesn't apply to everyone, but it does apply to some folks. So specifically compliance with the single financial audit requirements. This is, something that we require folks to self-report annually during the competition. But with that said, we, at THN do our due diligence to verify those responses through the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So would recommend, reviewing those requirements annually for compliance. SAM.gov registration and UEI or unique identity maintenance. These are things that we generally only think of annually, but things that we definitely want to make sure you take the time to review. You definitely do not want to find yourself in a scenario where either your SAM registration renewal or your UEI lapses for whatever reason, because those issues can take months to resolve. And we don't want to see you in a situation where you are no longer eligible to renew your project in the competition because there is, those renewals lapsed for whatever reason. If you are not the person responsible for maintaining this in your organization, I would encourage you to find out who that person is. And if you are the person responsible for this maintenance, I would strongly encourage you to make sure that someone else in your organization at least has access to those accounts. And there's a couple of other items on here I didn't go into detail on that maybe aren't necessarily relevant to every project type, but if you have subrecipients, we recommend reviewing those subrecipients agreements annually. We are happy to review those as well if you want to send those to myself and Axton. Procurement policies, again, doesn't apply to everyone, but recommend reviewing those annually as well.
Just real quick on that procurement policy. For example, if you're subject to the single financial audit requirements, they're going to want to see the procurement process that you use to select your auditor, right? Like that's a real possibility, something that could come up in a monitoring. So you may think, oh, well, we don't really do procurement in the COC program. And by and large, we really don't, right? But if your agency, again, is subject to the SFA requirements, they are going to want to see how you selected your auditor. And specifically, right, like how you're compliant with the audit or with the procurement requirements in 2 CFR 200. I just wanted to touch really quickly on the second bullet point, that expenditures and cost allowability review. What I've seen that look like most typically is a meeting between program staff and finance staff, right, where the finance staff will pull a report out of QuickBooks or whatever system y'all are using to track all of your expenditures. And then the two departments reconcile those reports together. I've seen it take, in my own experience, as little as 10 minutes. I've also seen it take hours, right? So you want to kind of budget your time accordingly, but this shouldn't be anything that's like too intimidating. I know we've got like the 2 CFR subpart E, all that stuff on there. Really what it is like the cost that you're billing to HUD or that you're seeking reimbursement for, one, were they allowable? Do you have the sufficient support documentation? And like, if it looks out of place to a program staff person, chances are, that's something that you want to review, right? Like you want to make sure that things that are being billed to the grant are indeed allowable. Yeah, I feel like that one couldn't be overstated in terms of the importance of that as a regular activity. We do recommend doing that monthly. We do that monthly for each federal program that we administer at THN, which, again, can be burdensome, but also if you stack those meetings on top of one another, you can just set a half day for your department head to meet with your CFO or whatever the case may be. But yeah, that one is really important.
Yeah, thanks,
That's
Jim.
all.
So I know we have been talking at you for quite a while and we've covered a lot of content. We just have a couple more slides to get through. If any questions are coming up for you, I know folks have been adding those in the chat. Feel free to continue doing that, but we'll have time here shortly for some Q&A. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Axton to talk about scorecards.
All right, quarterly performance scorecards, my current favorite topic. So as everyone here who operates a COC project is likely aware, we have scorecards that are completed on a quarterly basis. And those scorecards are same metrics are also used during the annual competition. We are currently in the process of updating our quarterly scorecards. Kind of at the bottom there, we're hoping to get that done soon. And once our updated draft is finished, we will have some feedback sessions that people wanted to look over those changes and submit as feedback. But first of all, what is the scorecards? So the purpose of the scorecard is to just evaluate the effectiveness of projects. Some of the items that are looked at on the scorecard include elements from the annual performance reports, APRs. We also look at metrics pulled from the system performance measures, SPMs. We also check things like spending reports. And then there are a few items on the scorecard that are just self-report information we get directly from projects. There are 6, I guess, kind of basic categories that the scorecard cover. The first category is whether or not projects are targeting hard to serve individuals. So this is looking at things about like enrolling clients who don't have income or enrolling clients who are chronically homeless. We also are looking at access to income. This is a big part of the scorecard, both because we believe it's important, but also because of the way HUD weights things in the annual competition. Access to income metrics are very closely tied to the system performance measures, and HUD has a requirement that we weight kind of system performance measures requirements a certain amount when we are evaluating projects. So if you just look at the scorecard, it maybe seems like there's a lot of elements asking about income, but it is largely related to the priorities HUD wants to see. So that includes whether or not people are increasing income or maintaining their income depending on project types, and whether or not they have like income when they're exiting projects, which is obviously going to be important for long-term stability. It tends to be hard for someone to maintain their housing if they're exiting the project with no income. So related to that, we also look at some housing stability metrics. So that includes just like returns to homelessness, and just like the percentage of participants that are exiting to permanent housing destinations. We're also looking at a category we call meeting community need. So this includes things like a project's like average daily bed utilization. Ideally, projects are going to remain at or very close to capacity at all times, so they're serving as many people as possible. We also look at here, broadly stated as kind of access to mainstream benefits. So that can include accessing like Social Security benefits or healthcare benefits, and the role and the effectiveness with which projects are assisting participants with those. We also have a category that's looking at racial equity. This is maybe a newer category. I believe we've had it on the last scorecard, but it's kind of being modified and beefed up a little bit on this scorecard. I would say this is partially in response to kind of HUD's shifting priorities over the past few years, and like the CSE NOFOs that are put out. HUD has been kind of increasingly prioritizing efforts related to racial equity. I know these could be a newer concept for a lot of projects. So the metrics we are looking at for racial equity are not too stringent, and some of them are going to be likely be unscored elements, just to kind of let projects know kind of how they're performing on some of these without actually scoring them. That also includes whether or not the agency is working with people with lived experience, preferably in like decision-making positions in the organization. That could also include whether or not agencies have Black, Indigenous, and people of color in positions of leadership positions at organization or on a board. And then the kind of final broad category we look at on the scorecards is related to HMIS data quality. Again, this is another item that HUD tends to be pretty strict on, and a lot of the SPMs that we report to HUD are very much reliant on good data quality. So those are another important element of the scorecards that looks at kind of timeliness of data entry and missing data elements and just kind of missing assessments that are needed. So those are kind of 6 broad categories. As we mentioned, we are in the process of updating these scorecards. We hope to have the update completed soon, and then sometime around March, probably start soliciting feedback from you all and all the other COC stakeholders. And yeah, have the opportunity to kind of further explain those scorecards or answer any questions you have about the metrics we are looking at or how those are being calculated. So see, there's a question in the chat here.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the Michelle's comment speaks to the need for feedback from projects. So I know that we are planning to do a targeted feedback session with the current COC recipients, because I think that's not something that we've really done before, but wanting to again take that into account to the extent that it's possible. Michelle, right? Like there are a variety of different concerns, especially when you start getting into subpopulation specific programs that maybe are not universal, but wanting to give folks the space to provide that type of feedback and see how we can incorporate that feedback into the COC's tools. So that is something that we are planning to do, and hopeful that everyone on this call will join us for that when we're ready.
Yeah, and I would add, when we were working on updating the scorecard, I definitely had an eye for trying to make the categories we're looking at kind of as universal as possible, applying to as many project types as possible. But there are certain elements that will be evaluated differently based on project type. I know you brought up kind of special considerations for projects serving survivors of domestic violence. And there are kind of special carve outs in the scorecard that would kind of set different requirements in some of these metrics based on the project type and based on whether they're serving domestic violence survivors.